Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brayden Hawkins, and I work with Ridley Block Operations out of Oklahoma and Texas. We're a part of the Alltech Feed Division, and we're also the manufacturers of Stockade supplements. Now, before we get to talking about fly control, I'd like to take a second and thank all of you for taking the time to reference this video and for your support of the Stockade brand. I speak for all of us at Alltech, Ridley, and Stockade when I say that if there's ever anything that any of us can do to help you or your operation, we're just a phone call away. Now, I'm sure it seems strange that we're talking about fly control, considering just a couple of weeks ago that most of the southern United States was experiencing the most severe winter weather a lot of us has ever seen. And we're still dealing with the ramifications of that and just trying to get back on our feet. So for a lot of people, and myself included, fly control can almost be out of sight, out of mind. We're just trying to get back to normal until this grass comes on and we can start kicking cows out on summer pasture and things like that. However, since that winter weather, we've gotten additional moisture and temperatures have been drastically increasing. I mean, just yesterday in Fort Worth, it was like 78 degrees. So that's very conducive for seeing a massive influx in the amount of flies. So it's an important time to try and get ahead of these things. And this chart, I think, does a good job of showing when people should start feeding fly control. It comes from our partners at Central Life Science, who are the manufacturers of Altis and Clarifly, which we'll go over in detail later. But you can actually see for most of Texas, they recommend feeding fly control starting March 1, and that's already passed us. For most of Oklahoma, it's March 15th, and that's just around the corner. So it's one of those deals that you can't have flies one day, start feeding a fly control supplement the next, and they're gone. It takes time for that active ingredient to work through cow's digestive tract and adequately treat all of the manure. So we need to try to be proactive in implementing some of these fly management practices. Now, this is a slide I could spend an hour on alone, but I think these bullet points summarize what harm flies can really do. For people, they're more of just a nuisance. They're a pest. But when you see a picture like the one on the screen and just the severe impact that can have on a little baby calf, I mean, it's obvious that these are more than a nuisance for cattle. Obviously, the most obvious, I think, is the stress it causes our cows, our calves. And there's a lot of research out there from Alltech and other organizations on the detrimental impact that stress can have on cattle performance. Whether it's rate of gain, feed efficiency, reduction in milk production, all of those things impact our bottom line, and flies are directly negatively impacting that. A couple that I don't think people always think about are the reduction in libido in bulls. If a bull's ate up with flies and, their breeding season's right in the heart of fly season, he's ate up with flies, he's spending his time in water or up against a tree or something like that, trying to just to relieve himself of the itching and the pain that these flies biting him all the time is causing. And if he's doing that, he's not going out and breeding cows. And as all of us know, the number one driver of profitability in a cow-calf operation is getting a live calf on the ground. And if a bull's not out breeding cows, it's very hard to accomplish that. Another one is the way they can spread diseases, whether that's mastitis or other bacterial diseases, or even viruses for that matter. I mean, diseases obviously are detrimental to performance, and flies are an extremely large vector of many diseases. And at the end of the day, all of that just adds up to a loss of profits. It's tough making a living in the cow business. I speak from experience there. And if we can do things to improve our profitability, I think that's something we have to jump on board with. Now, all of that is just, general theories, but when you actually start looking at the numbers and quantifying the economic impact that the flies can have on cattle producers, it's pretty mind-blowing. For the sake of time in this particular presentation from a geographic standpoint, we're going to focus on the stable and the horn flies, but you can also see that there's two others that we look at, and it's the housefly and the face fly. Now, the stable fly causes about $500,000 in economic loss, but the horn fly, which is the biggest culprit, causes about $1 billion. I mean, those are serious numbers that cattle producers and the cattle industry as a whole is leaving on the table in terms of lack of performance or lost performance at the expense of flies. So to go into a little more detail on the flies themselves that we're going to focus on, which are the horn flies and the stable flies, we're going to start with the horn fly because it is without a doubt the most notorious for causing a reduction in performance. They're a small black fly. And both sexes are blood feeders, which differentiates from some other species. They stay on cattle all day long, taking about 20 to 40 blood meals per day, and that can result. And at a 2,000 corn fly per animal rate or infestation, that results in an animal losing almost a gallon of blood a day. And I mean, you think of in a lot of the southern United States, fly season can last 6 months long. And if they're losing anywhere from half a gallon to a gallon of blood a day, think of how much energy is wasted trying to just replenish their blood supply that could be used towards reproductive performance or weight gain. I mean, it is serious detrimental impacts that we're talking about here. And another thing that when cows are being impacted by flies, they're not going out and grazing. Cattle are very habitual. You see them doing kind of the same patterns every day, especially from a grazing standpoint, and flies disrupt that. So that means you're not utilizing your land resources as well as you could be. And obviously, which will be a reoccurring theme throughout this presentation, those cattle aren't performing to their peak ability or to whatever genetic potential that they possibly have. The other fly that we're going to talk about, which is a little different than the horn fly, is the stable fly. It will attack a wide range of host animals, and not just cattle. It's donkeys, mules, horses, you name it. Primarily on the legs. If you see them on the legs, you see animals kind of moving their legs up and down, kind of kicking at them. That's probably a stable fly. Have a very painful bite. Been known to transmit mastitis and other bacterial and viral infections, and cause a loss of blood and a loss of flesh. Again, it's just going to make those cattle, it's going to make it more difficult for those cattle to do their jobs. Here's another chart just kind of showing how you come up with that 432 or $500 million in estimated production loss in cattle. But I kind of like this quote. I know this is a beef presentation, but it comes from some dairy research that was done. But as few as 4 stable flies per cow can reduce production by 3% a month. I mean, if you can add an additional 3% to your margin, to your output, to anything like that, I mean, you're making more money, and that's 3% that we can't afford to leave on the table. So now kind of shifting gears into some of the ways that Stockade actually can help alleviate some of the concerns that flies cause, and some of the tools that we have in our toolbox. We're going to talk about the ingredients that we use in a lot of our products. We use 4. It's Clarifly and Altis IGR, which are both made by Central Life Sciences that I mentioned earlier. We use Rabon, which is made by Bayer. And then we also use garlic. We're going to start with Altis IGR because I think it's probably the most widely recognized fly control ingredient on the market. The active ingredient in it is methoprene, but it's been around since 1975. I mean, it's been out there a very, very long time. And you can kind of see the chart or the diagram in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide about kind of how the active ingredient is delivered and how it works from there. So the cattle consume it. It passes through their digestive tract. It's excreted into the manure. Flies lay their larvae into the manure. When the larvae hatch, they consume the manure, and in return, they're consuming the active ingredient. And Alticid mimics the biochemical and the hormone that are responsible for hornfly development, and it prevents them from maturing. So I think it's important to note that Alticid is only effective against hornfly, and it costs about 3 cents per head per day to feed that product. It's very widely recognized, very widely used, and you can see that we've got a low pour tub with it in there, which is our Stockade eliminator. We also have a couple different loose minerals with that. The next one I wanted to talk about is Rabon. And again, it's made by Bayer, and it's a little different than Alticid or Clarifly. It's actually a tetrachlorbenphos, and it's effective against 4 breeds of flies. It passes through the digestive tract in the same way that the Alticid and the Clarifly do, but it actually kills the larva instead of just preventing them from mature. It's a little more bioactive in terms of how long it remains in soil and sewer. It can be up to 6 weeks, but more commonly 3 to 4. Some of the supplements that we use are a loose mineral product with Rabon in it, as well as our very popular Rabon Fly Control Press Block. And one that actually has come on very strong the last couple of years on the beef cattle side of things, or I guess I should say the pasture cattle side of things, is Clarifly. The active ingredient in it is difluorobenzeron, and it's a chitin synthesis inhibitor. And essentially, all that means is that, instead of mimicking a hormone or killing the larva, it prevents those larvae from forming an exoskeleton. So that's how it's effective against 4 species of flies. Much like the Rabon is in that regard, but it's also effective for horses, ponies, donkeys, mules, you name it. It will prevent any of those things from forming any type of fly from forming an exoskeleton, and costs about 4 cents per head per day to include in most of our rations. So here you can see that we've got a few different supplements. We've got a Clarifly Press Block, a high mag mineral that falls under our Blueprint line, which is our flagship brand in terms of being our premium 100% organic trace mineral inclusion, which is our Bioplexes, and it's got the Clarifly in it. That's a really great product. And then we also have the 4 Fly Lakes with Clarifly, and all of these can be found on our website or by reaching out to your local Stockade or dealer or distributor. And last but not least, and it's something I've continued to hear more and more about, is garlic. The active ingredient in garlic extract is Altis, I believe, is how it's pronounced. Very strong smelling, and it's broken down into different sulfur compounds which pass through the blood, reaches the skin and lungs. It's excreted, and it just changes the overall smell and then palatability of those insects or those flies. But I think it is very important to note it acts as a repellent and not a control. It's not breaking the life cycle of the fly itself. It's just repelling them. So we're not actually controlling the fly population. It's just being used as a repellent. Some people might consider it to be used as an alternative option in some all-natural programs, and I think it's picking up some speed there. And I've had a lot of questions on the Bullseye 6 mineral with garlic. Again, it's not a control, it's just a repellent. At the end of the day, however, it's important to note that management is key. We're never going to get rid of flies 100%. They say, again, coming from Central Life Sciences, that 200 flies per animal is kind of that economic threshold. If you can keep it below that, they're really not consuming enough blood to have negative impact on performance. But you get much over that, you start to see a decline in the ability for those cattle to get out and perform. Again, we're never going to get rid of them completely. And I also think it's important to note that there's no silver bullet when it comes to fly control. We have to have a comprehensive approach to how we manage these things, just like we do everything else in the cattle business. We need to continue to use external treatments along with feed-throughs, but we also have to be cognizant and aware of our budget. So I think working with your extension agents, your veterinarians, your feed stores, your representatives that you work with is very important to coming up with a comprehensive fly control and overall production practice that fits you, your operations goals, and your budget. At the end of the day, Stockade has you covered. Stockade has fly control and every form of self-fed supplement, which makes us very unique. If you take into consideration there's 4 or 5 different forms of self-fed supplement, and we have 4 different active ingredients spread out across those, it gives producers a lot of different options to choose from when it comes to fighting flies. I think the biggest point that I can send people home with is that by feeding fly control, not only are we able to deliver nutrients that is going to improve the performance of your cattle, you're also improving their overall health by reducing the risk of lost performance or disease being spread to them through flies. So we're simultaneously able to increase our herd health and nutrition in a convenient, cost-effective way. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. If there's ever anything that we can do to help, again, we're just a phone call away. Thank you for your time.